All right, very good. So section 4.4 is going to be about two more congruence postulates that we can use to prove that two triangles are congruent. So if you remember, in our last lesson we learned about SSS congruence and SAS congruence. We're going to add to that ASA and AAS congruence. Okay, and so angle side angle is exactly what it sounds like. If two angles and the included side of one triangle are congruent, then we can say that the two triangles are congruent. Okay, so if you remember the included angle in our lesson yesterday, that was the angle that was in between two sides that we've proven are congruent. Well, here we're working with two angles and the included side. So here in this triangle, angle A and angle B would be the two angles, and then this side is the included side because it's between those two angles. So if we can prove that two angles in the included side are congruent between two triangles, then that's enough to be able to say that the two triangles are congruent. Okay, so that's one congruence postulate, and then the other congruence postulate that we can know for sure is this one, and this says that if two angles and a non-included side, there should be a dash there, of one triangle are congruent to two angles and a non-included side of another triangle, then the two triangles are congruent, which clearly is angle, angle, side. So we also can just have that two angles are congruent and a side that is not necessarily included. So it doesn't have to be the included side if we've proven that two triangles are congruent. It can be a non-included side. Okay, so before we move on, let's just take a quick second to think about this for a second. Okay, so as we're trying, if in proofs, when we're trying to prove that two triangles are congruent, we know the roadmap. We already know where we're trying to go. Where we're trying to get to is to prove that all three sides, corresponding sides, are congruent, that two corresponding sides are congruent and the included angle, that two corresponding angles are congruent and the included side, or that two corresponding angles are congruent and either of the non-included sides. Okay, so when we are proving that two triangles are congruent, this is the roadmap that we have to take. We know exactly where we're trying to go. We're trying to go one of these four directions to prove that the four triangles are congruent. So you don't exactly have to feel like you have no idea what to do. You can know what to do right away. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to get to one of these four postulates. That three sides are congruent, a side and the included angle, two angles and the included side, or two angles and a side. So, moving right along, we're going to just look at a few examples, and we're going to try and see if we can prove any of our congruence postulates. Okay. So is it possible to prove that these two triangles are congruent? If so, name the congruence and state why. Okay, we're just going to go through this first one, and then what I would like you to do is I would like you to come and ask me about this one right here. Okay, so just do this first one and then come ask me about this, and I'm going to teach you a rule. Okay. So do we know enough about this triangle on the left to be able to say that the triangles are congruent? If so, state the congruence postulate. Okay, here we go. Well, the only thing that I see in this triangle is that these two triangles share a side right here, and that side is clearly going to be congruent to itself. Okay, and so since it's congruent to itself, we can add two tick marks there. But other than that, that's all that I can prove. We don't know anything else about this triangle. I'm not able to say that this angle is congruent to that angle, or that this angle is congruent to this angle, or there's no way I could prove that this side is congruent to that side. But if I could prove any of those, I would be able to say that. But since we can only prove two sides are congruent, then we don't know enough to be able to say that these two triangles are congruent. Okay, let's look at another one. Okay, what about this one? Okay, do we know enough to prove that the triangles are congruent? If so, name the congruence and state why. Well, it's the exact same picture, but now we do know that these two sides are congruent, so we know that this is congruent to itself. So we would say yes, these two triangles are congruent, and that would be by side, side, side congruence. Okay? All right, here's what you have in your notes. You're going to have two proofs, and I want you to try both of them completely on your own. And this is going to be your practice problems for this section. Okay, you're going to try both of these proofs. Remember, come ask me about this one right here, and I'm going to teach you something that you don't know yet. So come ask me about this, and then when you're done with that, your practice problems for Chapter 4, Section 4 are going to be these two proofs that are at the end of your notes. Okay? All right, thank you, and come see me.